fill my cup up with boiling hot water right to the top. And what I noticed would happen is that I would be sitting in a meeting with a boiling hot mug of tea, and I would imagine throwing it in somebody's face, like swilling somebody with my boiling hot cup of tea. Hey guys, it's Agnes. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you're new here. I'm a psychiatric nurse and therapist, and I have had a huge amount of experience personally and professionally with intrusive thoughts. I did a quick Google recently because I was interested to see how the internet defined intrusive thoughts. And what I found was honestly quite interesting. I feel like doing a Google search, you only really come across the kind of really quite extreme end of intrusive thoughts, often associated with like a diagnosis of OCD. And I don't have OCD, I have chronic anxiety. And I've experienced a lot of varied and unpleasant intrusive thoughts. And I know a lot of people who have intrusive thoughts, but they don't have OCD. So if you stumble across some definition of it and it feels not like what I'm talking about in this video, then yeah, that's just, I don't know what to do about that. The internet and I guess my personal understanding are just like slightly misaligned, but I think that the internet is only looking at like the most extreme rather than like the broad spectrum. Let me get to my point, okay? I think that intrusive thoughts are actually really quite common, but a lot of people have not heard them defined in this way. So I think one of the most common examples is if you are at the top of a really, really high building, imagining falling off. So I spoke about this briefly in my video about mental health and humor, which if you haven't watched, you should. I'm pretty proud of it. It is silly, plus, which I was really happy with. So I think being able to imagine yourself either throwing yourself off a tall building or falling off a tall building, or if you were like looking over a body of water, imagining dropping your glasses or your phone into said water. And I feel like these thoughts, they come about almost with a feeling a bit like there's an impulse there. It's like you're watching something in your head that you really, really don't want to happen. But there is this little niggling thing of like, but what if I did though? What if I did, you know? I'm imagining that like the majority of people watching this video will have a vague idea of what I'm talking about. I think often intrusive thoughts come about with either a feeling of you yourself being hurt or somebody you love being hurt. So another whole separate range of intrusive thoughts could look like your loved one is doing a long car journey and you haven't heard from them. You haven't heard them say that they've arrived at their destination at the time that you thought they would have. And you feel like you know that they're dead. You feel like you know that something terrible has happened and you're never hearing from them again. And I mean, what has occurred on that occasion, which I think it's incredibly important to be clear with, and this is basically one of my biggest recommendations for dealing with intrusive thoughts, is that nothing has changed. Nothing has actually changed in reality. The road that your loved one is driving on didn't immediately become less safe. Their car didn't immediately become less safe. Actually, what happened, the only thing that happened was that your anxiety levels increased. And that's the same whether you are an anxiety sufferer or whether you have OCD or whether you have neither of them, but you are perhaps just experiencing a moment of stress and your nervous system is responding to that. So another kind of category of thoughts that I have had before, I think a pretty good example of this is the first evening that I was in charge of looking after my niece. So she would have been maybe only like 3 months old or something, and I looked after her for just an evening. And I imagined, so she was tiny little baby. I imagined taking her outside. She was born the end of September, so we're talking winter time, would have been like around about Christmas or something. I imagined taking her outside and putting her in a bin. in a bin.
Nuts! I want to find out.
Now, I ran through the scenario in my head. I was like, God, you know, it's cold outside. She wouldn't last long. She wouldn't last long at all. And when my sister and brother-in-law came home, they'd be like, where's the baby? Maybe I just wouldn't tell them and then they'd be looking for her. Wouldn't that be absolutely horrendous? So the thing I need to be very, very clear on is that I do not wish any harm towards my niece. In fact, when that type of thought occurs, the opposite is the thing that is true. Actually, I care so much about doing a good job, and I feel in that moment I felt such a sense of responsibility in a new and frightening way because I'd never been alone with her before, that is what provoked my anxiety levels to be really heightened, and that's what made that thought come about. And I think that people can be absolutely terrified of intrusive thoughts, especially when it is about harm towards another person, because it can make them think like, oh my God, do I actually want to do this terrible thing? No, I don't want to put my niece in the bin. That's the craziest thing ever. She's literally the light of my life, best thing to have ever happened to me. I'm like her second mum. And I was also then. So no, absolutely not. That is not something I want to have happened whatsoever. So that example is like a pretty inflammatory one that I suppose. So intrusive thoughts, they come up swiftly and completely involuntary. So we have absolutely no control over them. They are a symptom of our nervous system responding to stress or distress or anxiety, and basically feeding our brain stimulation that we then get kind of more of a rise out of. So we respond physically, and then there's this kind of feedback loop. So one of the best things we can do in that situation, like with my niece, thankfully, I know enough about intrusive thinking that when that thought crossed my mind, instead of me thinking, she isn't safe around me because I'm having these thoughts about putting her in the bin, she's not safe, I shouldn't be alone with her, I can't be trusted with her. It would have been really, really easy to go into that kind of spiral. But instead of that, I thought, oh, my anxiety levels are really high just now. I obviously really care about doing a good job. So when we are able to learn more about our minds and how we are producing these thoughts, we can then become really reflective and analytical about how we're responding to them. And the response is everything, because either we can look at it for what it is, which is anxiety, we can respond appropriately to the anxiety, and we can deal with what is actually happening in reality, or we can spiral hugely and have this really like extra terrifying experience of basically thinking that we're a terrible, terrible person and that we are like unsafe to be around other people. I've come across plenty of professional situations in which someone's come along and said, I am having these thoughts and feelings and I don't feel safe. Or I feel like my family isn't safe because these are the things that are going through my head. And I always think it's such a shame when it gets to that level, because somebody could have been tormented for years thinking that they're like a terrible person. They're not. They're just anxious. They are experiencing anxiety. Another one of these that I have had, so the bin example actually only really happened once. But one that for me was really, really, really repeated. I don't actually have it anymore, which is interesting. But when I was in like a work environment, like with colleagues and things, I'm a big herbal tea drinker. This is relevant. I'm a big herbal tea drinker. And when you make a herbal tea, I mean, I put in all hot water and then I let it cool down a bit and I drink it while it's still quite hot. It's really good for your digestive system. If anybody has a slow moving system, if you know what I mean. I'm not going to go into any more detail, but doctors say it's good for that. So I drink a lot of herbal tea, and I fill my cup up with boiling hot water right to the top. And what I noticed would happen is that I would be sitting in a meeting with a boiling hot mug of tea, and I would imagine throwing it in somebody's face, like swilling somebody with my boiling hot cup of tea. And again, I would kind of imagine like the fallout a little bit. Like, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't imagine it. I would imagine the various scenarios. Like, would people be so shocked that the person I'd done it to would scream for sure. Like, that would be really, really painful because it's boiling hot water. I don't know, like, would they ask me why I did it, or would they just be so shocked they wouldn't talk to me? Would I be so mortified that I would just leave? Would I run away? I should be arrested. But would that happen if it was work colleagues? Would I be like detained under the Mental Health Act because it would be clear that I'd like gone crazy? What would happen, you know? So that one was pretty unpleasant. And it was one that I certainly had over a number of years. But again, I was able, because I have the information regarding these thoughts, to be like, I know that I don't actually want to do that. There's nothing in me that wants to harm literally anyone around me. In fact, if you guys know anything about me, it is really quite the opposite. I am an incredibly caring, compassionate, empathetic person, and I'm vegan most of the time in order to reduce harm to other beings. Like, I don't want to hurt anyone. So obviously, that thought was coming about because it was actually the opposite of what I wanted to happen. And I noticed that it would happen most of all if I was going into a conversation with a colleague that I thought could potentially be quite stressful, or if I was going into a meeting where there were going to be lots of people there and I was going to be talking quite a bit, because I would get quite stressed about that. So those are kind of my thoughts that I've had to do with harm towards other people, and they're things that on the professional end of things I've heard echoed throughout the years. People saying that they have had similar thoughts. And again, they really only come about with someone that you genuinely like, you really do not wish harm towards. In fact, it can often be in quite a protective role, you know, kind of parents towards kids. I think that I just got distracted by seeing something in my garden through my curtains. Please hold. So some of the smaller, kind of less inflammatory, intrusive thoughts, and these are the ones that honestly I could not see any information about on the internet. These are kind of like, I would sort of describe them in myself as like little like nervous system niggles. They're not something that I get like a huge nervous system response from, but it would be like just enough that it's annoying. And if they occur repeatedly and if we feed into them in a certain way with our behavior, then they can become really problematic and they can really impact your day-to-day life. So these are thoughts along the kind of spectrum of like, you're lying in bed and you can't remember whether you locked your front door. More specifically, you kind of know that you locked your front door, but you don't quite trust yourself. So you end up getting out of bed to go and check that you've locked your front door. And you might be the kind of person that only does that once. I hear the same thing with ovens and hair straighteners all the time. You might only do that once and then you're kind of satisfied. But when you might see that becoming much more of a problem is when you've done it 10 times and you're still not satisfied. And that's when you get to that real kind of like, you are being significantly impacted by an OCD level of interference in your day-to-day life. I'm doing a lot of talking with my hands.
OCD level.
Little niggles that I have, and again, this is a physically uncomfortable one. I think I must have had an experience when I was a lot younger when I used this type of razor. So like a Gillette razor, when you have got all of the separate little blades in a little plasticky thing. And the reason I'm making this face is because it makes me feel really uncomfortable to talk about. And actually when I was Googling intrusive thoughts, I had this just like continuous little uncomfortable feeling down my spine. It makes me like, you know, like almost cringe. It makes me physically cringe to think about this, but I'm going to tell you guys about it anyway. So a Gillette razor, I certainly have never, ever, ever, ever done this deliberately, but what I imagine in my head is running my finger down a Gillette razor with the multiple little, and I'm in my head, I am going in the right direction as the blades, but I still know I'm going to cut myself on them because of how sharp they are. So that to me, it kind of feels like the sensation of imagining like hearing fingers down a chalkboard, you know? It really gets me going in a terrible way. Gets me going in a very unpleasant way. So the way I deal with these feelings, if I am having quite a few of them, which I will if my anxiety levels are quite high, those little niggling, really the most effective way I have ever seen to deal with them is mindful breathing. So taking a big deep breath and trying to breathe into the lowest part of your body that you possibly can. So kind of imagining filling up the bottom of your lungs, imagining your diaphragm really expanding. And then a really refreshing big out breath. And almost kind of blowing out the out breath. And I feel like for me, I kind of imagine it like I'm blowing the cobwebs away from my own mind. And in my experience, if a couple of those breaths don't do anything to sort of soothe the physical feeling I'm having, which I think one more of those than it would have in this instance, then really changing activity, seeking to distract yourself so that you're kind of further removed from it, seeking to change your environment, engage in a conversation so that your mind is busy, really something to kind of take yourself away from it if you feel yourself having that thought like absolutely repeatedly. I definitely think that I have a real sensitivity to thoughts like that, and that if I wasn't so skilled in dealing with them in a very kind of calm and collected and soothing way, then I think that I could have a real problem. Like, as in, I think it could become a big problem in my day-to-day life. So guys, I kind of want to wrap this up. I'm aware this video is a bit longer than the ones that I've been doing recently, and I have been trying to keep myself pretty short. I'm definitely going to return to this topic because it's a big one. But yeah, I think that it is a very, very interesting thing to discuss. I think it's not discussed nearly often enough, and then people walk around having these thoughts routinely, feeling like there's something really, really, really wrong with them. Also, you'll have already seen this by now, but I'm pretty sure that there's some words in here I'm gonna have to like bleep myself out. I'm pretty sure I've used some words that YouTube is not keen on. The bots are going to be analyzing this video, trying to figure out what the hell I'm talking about. Okay, guys, it has been a pleasure. That's not true. It has been a displeasure for my nervous system, which feels kind of like a little bit fried just now. Don't like talking about this. I don't like going over my own ones hugely. Okay, guys, take good care, and I will see you in my next video. If you have any thoughts about this topic, please let me know below. If you have heard about this before or not, I'd be really, really interested to hear from you. Take care. Bye.